Thank you for joining us today. I call the October 12th, 2023 meeting of the Police Advisory Board and Oversight Board to order. Let's begin with an introduction of commission members. I'm your Vice Chair, Lucretia King.
Conrad Thomas.
Todd Spellberg.
Dave Hoganson.
Tanya Graywind.
The next item is to approve the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Next item is to approve the minutes of the September 14th, 2023 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Now the next item on the agenda is approving the new agenda item. Can I get a motion to approve the new agenda item? Do you have that?
What was the new agenda item?
Okay, the new agenda item is questions from the community members.
Yeah, I can give a little clarification on that for y'all. So in our last meeting, when we met with the chair and the vice chair, we talked about questions that were coming from community members to the board members that we wanted to make sure that we could address as a police department. And a lot of those questions don't get to us until like briefly at the meeting or before the meeting. So some examples were how trespass orders work, why officers wouldn't arrest on misdemeanors. So questions similar to that you may get from the community or you may have yourself could then get sent to the chair and the vice chair so they could bring it to our agenda meeting, setting meeting the Friday before your meetings. And then we would choose of those questions what we can answer. So that gives us some time to work on them. So you kind of have like a whole month to gather information that might lead to questions that the community members might have that ask of you so that we can make sure that we get those questions answered. So that was one thing we talked about getting approved as an agenda item. So it would be almost like public comment. It would just give them a certain time so that we can answer those questions for you.
Any questions?
Just one question in terms of getting that information to the board here. So the community do understand the process and the procedure by which they need to do to solicit those questions.
Yeah, so the process that we talked about would be if, I'll just use you as an example, Mr. Thomas, if you had a question come from a community member while you were having coffee and you were like, that's a good question, I think we should bring that to the board, you would then send that to your chair or vice chair and ask them to bring that to the agenda setting meeting. And then once that group would sit down with us and we would choose those questions that we could answer. Obviously, we couldn't probably answer all of them if we got a ton of questions, but the chair and vice chair would determine kind of which questions were more pressing per se. If we have time to answer, say 20 questions, we sure could, but we want to touch on some of the more important ones.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the new agenda item?
I'll motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay, the next item is the public comment item. Those who wish to address the Police Advisory and Oversight Board must use the sign-in sheet in the back. Speakers state their name and will be limited to 3 minutes. Comments should not contain profanity or personal attacks. Staff, do we have anyone signed up for public comment tonight?
Before we move to that, can we just get a vote on that last agenda item to add the agenda item? You had a motion and then you accepted the motion.
all
Now
in
we just
favor.
need a vote.
Oh, all in favor? For the new
Aye.
agenda item?
Aye.
Forgot about that.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, and next item is department updates.
Yeah, we did not have anyone sign up for public comment.
Okay.
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 As far as the department update, I don't have a ton to share. Chief wished he could have been here, but they're down at the IACP conference with the assistant chief. But a couple things that they wanted me to pass along is a group from NDSU Extension, reached out to our community engagement team leadership and the chief, and they met with them. Their goals are like information as far as health, equality, training, and that comes from their learning coordinator. So they met with our lieutenant, captain, and then the chief, I believe. And some of the things that they wanted to do is just help us with community engagement. And one of the options that we said might be really good would be to bring those type of trainings and education into this board setting, kind of like we're going to have the motor vehicle pursuit and policy stuff come forward. They really focus on new Americans and the Native American groups. So that's kind of where they focus their attention. So some of the topics that they talked about doing were, giving driving rules and helping people understand how that works and answer questions that they might have. They kind of felt it would be a good way to generate individuals to come to these meetings and educate, kind of like what we're looking to do. So we're in the very infancy stages of that, but the chief wanted to make sure that we mentioned that. So we're working with that group at NDSU. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, cool. The next thing is going to be, they wanted me to update you on the police department subject matter expert, as it refers to the Collaborative Reform Initiative Technical Assistance Center Work Plan. That's a mouthful to talk. So they reached out to the second subject matter expert, the organization did, and that individual hasn't gotten back with them. So the chief kind of wanted me to explain how that works. Is their subject matter experts also have different jobs. So it's something where they'll reach out to them. They have said, hey, yes, we'll be your subject matter expert, but sometimes they don't have time to do so. So he wanted to let you know that that individual has not reached out to the organization yet, but he was going to meet with this group at the IACP conference and try and have an update. So when he gets back, he'll be able to speak to it a little bit better, as if maybe we should go with the first subject matter expert that I know that we had talked about at previous meetings, but he was going to bring that back once he had an opportunity to speak with them this week. That's all I got for you, unless you have any questions for me.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next item is the presentation on pursuit policy and training.
Hello, everyone. So I had the pleasure of doing a presentation a couple months back, and I figured I would reintroduce myself. I'm Troy Hanig. I'm the lieutenant of our training and development unit at Fargo PD. Some of the things we specialize in are recruiting and hiring. We do our department-wide trainings. We hold 2 police academies a year, and we also run our police training officer program for once our brand new officers hit the street. So I'm accompanied here by one of my sergeants on the training team. I'll let him introduce himself as well.
Yeah, Sergeant Travis Berger. Just again, another member of the training and development unit. Excited to be here to provide some instruction. So.
All right, so for today, we were asked to do a presentation on motor vehicle pursuits. This isn't going to be an all-inclusive type thing as far as what we have in our policy, but it's going to hit the high notes, and we'll give you guys an opportunity to have a better understanding of what we do to train our officers, and then ask any questions that you have. So it's going to be fairly informal, so if you have any questions as we're going through, just let us know, and we'll answer those to the best of our ability. All right, so first off, we'll talk about the overall agenda for the presentation. So first, we want to discuss basically the importance of educating our officers on this topic and explain why motor vehicle pursuits ends up being one of our highlights when we're training our new officers, because the risk involved and the liability involved in it is very great, and we want to make sure we're preparing our people for success. Next, we'll talk about the law enforcement legal authority in regards to vehicle pursuits, how that looks, and what portions of the law allow us to do the things that we can do in a police vehicle. We'll then cover the Fargo PD vehicle pursuit policy. Again, that won't be all inclusive, but it will cover the high points, and then if you have any questions, we can try and fill in the blanks there as well. And last, we'll discuss the emergency driving training that we offer at Fargo PD and how that looks overall and some of the things that we've put into place to help provide this skill set to our officers.
All right, so to start, we'll talk a little bit about our philosophy, and this statement actually comes right out of our policy manual. The Fargo Police Department recognizes the safety of the general public and any police officer involved in a vehicle pursuit is of paramount importance. We stress a common sense balance between the importance of apprehending offenders and the high-risk nature of vehicle pursuits when we have those who choose to violate the law by fleeing from us. So to describe that a little bit more in detail, we kind of talk about risk versus reward. When we have an offender that we are looking to apprehend, we want to balance that risk of the public, the risk of the offender, the risk of us versus the reward or that apprehension. So there's a lot of different things that we take into consideration when we try to determine whether or not it makes sense for us to pursue that particular suspect or allow them to go and try to apprehend them at a later time.
So just to define in a little more detail what some of that pursuit risk is and some of the things we're weighing as we go into it, there's a lot of research and a lot of data compiled across the nation about motor vehicle pursuits just because of the high risk nature to them and the potential danger to public safety if they're not done properly and for the right reasons. And most recent national data on police vehicle pursuits found that there's approximately 2 serious injuries or 10 minor injuries for every 100 pursuits that take place. So this data was listed in a publication put out by the Police Executive Research Forum. That's a group that puts together best practices for law enforcement. And for subject matters like this, where we want to review to make sure we're doing all the proper things in regards to our policy and in regards to how we're training our officers, we refer to this. So this gives us some pretty good insight as to some of the dangers associated with motor vehicle pursuits and why it's such an important thing for us to review and maybe implement the proper restrictions that we need to so it's done safely. So 76% of those serious injuries that occurred were with suspects based on this study. 21% of the serious injuries which occurred were to persons not even involved in the pursuit. And for us, this is extremely important in regards to this percentage because this is potentially the kid that's walking along the sidewalk when this pursuit comes by. It could be someone that's driving in another vehicle on the roadway and they're all of a sudden caught up into this motor vehicle pursuit. So for us, this is a very important statistic and it really drives home why we need to be safe and utilize our best judgment when we're considering this type of thing. And lastly, 3% of the serious injuries occurred to law enforcement officers. The National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration also puts together a great deal of data. Based on that, from 2015 to 2020, they compiled the data of fatalities involved in police pursuits with motor vehicles. And with that, I mean, that's an average of 370.5 fatal crashes per year. So obviously it's something that we don't take lightly. So if we're going to be pursuing a vehicle, it's going to be for the right reasons. And we're, again, weighing that risk versus reward and whether or not it's a calculated risk and that we need to take it to increase public safety. So with this, we all see in the media and the movies and things like that what motor vehicle pursuits are. And there's a lot of times misconceptions or myths related with what they see on TV and what reality is closer to being. So this publication actually highlighted what some of those myths were in regards to what the data showed and what the reality is out there. And we thought they were pretty interesting statistics that kind of help explain why we are fairly restrictive with our policies in regards to when we're going to implement motor vehicle pursuits. So the first myth we'll talk about is that people flee the police only when they've committed a serious crime. Again, I think the movies, the television shows, they a lot of times lead you to believe that's the case. If this person's willing to flee from police, they obviously must have done something really horrible. In all reality, what the research shows is actually more than 90% of these pursuits are initiated because of a simple traffic violation. So for us, when we compare that to the amount of injuries that occur, the percentage of those, it's something that we want to make sure we're being as responsible as we can with public safety, especially in our community. And we don't want to take unnecessary risks because it's not uncommon for someone to flee because they were maybe speeding or they had an equipment violation and maybe they thought they had a warrant or something else minor of that nature. What we generally find is the majority of the population are law-abiding citizens, and they wouldn't flee from police naturally because they don't want to get in trouble. With the technology we have, even the ones that are fleeing from us, most of the time, we bring that to a successful resolution. We figure out who they are. We end up catching them later, and they're prosecuted for those. So the percentages of people that are actually fleeing from us is a very small percentage of the population, and they're likely going to flee whether we're stopping them for a minor equipment violation or something that in their mind may be much more serious. The next myth is if police disengage from the pursuit, the suspect will keep driving dangerously or commit additional violent crimes or both. In reality, research showed that during one study, approximately 75% of offenders have said that they would actually slow down when they felt safe. So the question that probably comes to your mind when we hear felt safe, what's that mean? And they asked the offenders what they meant by that. And in a city environment, their thought was if they weren't experiencing police intervention like lights, sirens for a period of 2 blocks or more, they all of a sudden felt more safe and they were more likely to slow down. Likewise, if that was in a highway environment, between 2 and 2.5 miles, if they didn't see lights, hear sirens, they felt much more comfortable, much less likely to continue fleeing. On the highways or on the freeways, the distance was 2.5 miles. So as that research showed, for us to shut down in a pursuit that's obviously feels like it's getting out of control, our shutting down will likely allow the pressure to come off that suspect enough to where they adjust that driving behavior and they're no longer taking unnecessary risk, which puts the public at risk. So another myth is...
Pardon me, Officer Troy, in terms of what you just spoke of, do the percentages reflect that in terms of when you have someone who is fleeing and then you have a public involvement, does that percentage include that's maybe what's happened, why that incident happened to a non-participant? Or is it, or does that percentage reflect the police officers causing an incident with a non-participant public person?
That's a great question. The data actually didn't dive into that portion of it. It really was geared more towards injuries related to motor vehicle pursuits. and what the numbers were associated
So
with that.
they discriminate what caused those injuries. Okay.
Right. And when we're looking at it as a police agency, we're more considering what can we do to mitigate that risk with our officers? Is there certain things through policy or training that we can implement to help mitigate that risk and avoid getting into those pursuits where that risk is unnecessary? Now, don't mistake what we're saying. If that risk is a needed thing, we will pursue based on the right circumstances. If it rises to a level where the reward is more and the reason to pursue is for public safety is more crucial than the risk that we're taking. So we know that there's always that risk. If we're going to pursue a vehicle, there's always a risk that something could happen, a crash could occur. A lot of times, the vehicle pursuit will end in a crash of the suspect or the police vehicle or both. And we know that there's a higher risk of injury because of that fact. And that's why, obviously, if we can avoid it or if the reward isn't high enough, we're going to avoid it. Another misconception, if police don't chase, everyone will flee. And again, this kind of rings true. Research indicated that if police didn't chase offenders, there would be no significant increase in the number of people who flee. And additional research suggested that the more restrictive pursuit policies didn't equate to higher crime rates. So with that, it kind of goes back to the point I made a little bit earlier in the fact that a very small amount or percentage of the population is actually out there committing the crime. The majority of the public are following all the rules of the road. They're following all the laws of the land. And if an officer goes to stop them, they're going to pull over because it's the right thing to do and they don't want to get in trouble for violating the law. The small percentage that's going to flee is likely going to flee irregardless of what the circumstances are.
All right, now we'll talk a little bit about legal authority. We're going to start with kind of a definition of a Class A authorized emergency vehicle, which is your typical first responder type police, fire truck, or ambulance. A Class A vehicle has to have oscillating, rotating, revolving, or flashing red or combination red and white lights that are visible under normal conditions at least 500 feet. In addition, they can also have a blue light added to that as well. The vehicle should also have a method of giving an audible signal by siren or air horn if appropriate. When it comes to having the lights and the air horn, that can be kind of important just because we want to make sure people can not only see when we're driving with our emergency lights on, but also potentially hear that. I do have a trivia question for you guys. At what speed do you think our squad car outruns the siren? Any guesses?
I don't see how you
I
can.
wouldn't think so.
Light travels faster
Well,
than
yeah, the speed of sound is about
the speed of sound.
600 feet.
So
600
actually,
miles
at
per second.
at 55 miles an hour, a squad car can travel faster than the sound of somebody hearing it. So think of it this way. If you're traveling down the highway at 55, 60 miles an hour, if you're not looking in your rearview mirror paying attention, a squad car can come right up next to you before you hear that siren. So the faster they are, the faster that's going to happen. So that's where that importance of making sure we have both the siren and the lights comes into play. So that's just an interesting fact for you.
So when they finally do pull over, is it more often because they heard you or saw you?
Oh, you did.
For us municipal police departments, it's the sound is definitely a big factor for us because we're traveling at lower speeds. I think when you talk about like the highway patrol on the interstates and the faster speeds, I would guess that the lights plays a big factor in that. Also the time of day, right? I mean, if it's dark out, it's a lot easier to see those lights.
So this just highlights what our Fargo Police squad cars look like. As you can see on the top, we're equipped with we actually have the red and blue oscillating lights as well as the flashing white lights as well. As far as the audible signals, our audible signal on our vehicles, we actually have two different tones that we can toggle to. You can either toggle to it on our switchboard down on the side, or you can actually just hit our horn as our siren's on, and it'll toggle from one to the other. And how we find that useful is when you are actually driving with an emergency response or in a pursuit, by toggling that siren, it oftentimes gets people's attention. So we do have to clear intersections before we go through them. So a lot of times as you're coming up to that intersection, if you toggle from one siren to the other tone, it's more apt to draw people's attention. So that is one of the key factors that we train people on.
All right, so when it comes to driving a Class A authorized vehicle, there are certain things that you can do that the general public normally wouldn't be able to do. One of those things is parking or standing, irrespective of the provisions of this chapter. So that what that's referring to is if we're responding to an emergency type situation, we have the ability to park basically wherever we need to deal with that situation. If that means blocking traffic, parking on a sidewalk, it really doesn't matter as long as we have an emergency response that's necessary for that. Proceeding past a red or stop signal or stop sign, but only after slowing down as may be necessary for safe operation. So basically what that says is we have the ability to go through red lights, to go through stop signs, but only after slowing down to the amount that you can clear that intersection. So in most cases, when we're training our officers, we're talking about slowing down somewhere between that 5 and 10 miles an hour. I mean, really slowing down so you can make sure you can clear that entire intersection before proceeding past. We are not allowed to just drive right through a red light or stop sign without slowing down first. Next would be exceeding the speed limit. So as long as the driver does not endanger life or property. When it comes to responding to a call for service or a pursuit, oftentimes the speed limit does get exceeded, but we need to limit that to the point that we can keep the citizens, the suspect, ourselves safe. So when it comes to us, a city like Fargo, where there's a lot of people, a lot of buildings, a lot of things to keep in mind, oftentimes that exceeding the speed limit is only 5, 10, 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. Where other agencies out in the county or the interstate, you might see them exceed that a little bit more. But it doesn't give us the ability to just drive as fast as we want. Also, disregarding regulations governing the direction of movement or turning in specified directions. So again, just kind of having control of the road if we need it. So if that means we need to cross over the center line to get around traffic, use the shoulder, use turn lanes, whatever we need, as long as, again, we have that emergency call that we're responding to, and we're responding with our lights and sirens.
So some of the provisions, this is straight out of North Dakota Century Code as to when officers can do those things listed in the prior slide. When the authorized emergency vehicle is in pursuit of or apprehension of a violator or a suspected violator requiring the use of these exemptions. Also, when the Class A emergency vehicle is being operated in response to a reported emergency involving possible personal injury, death, or damage to property. And in any instance when the head of a law enforcement agency deems it advisable within the area of that person's jurisdiction for the protection of the person and property, and when giving audible signal by siren or adequate warning by use of emergency lights. So just an example, that third one of when we would have used that during the flood of '09. We had squad cars all across the city that were providing escorts to sandbag trucks. Again, the protection of property piece of that was what allowed us to do that, and it was something that we were doing under the authorization of the chief of police.
All right, so next we're going to define what a motor vehicle pursuit is. So motor vehicle pursuit is an event involving one or more sworn officers attempting to stop a subject who is trying to avoid detention or arrest while operating a motor vehicle by using evasive tactics and or maneuvers such as a high rate of speed, disregarding traffic warning signs, stop signs, red lights, driving off of a roadway, turning suddenly, or willfully failing to yield to an officer's signal to stop. So we're referring to somebody that is making it obvious that they're trying to evade or get away from us. This isn't just somebody that maybe doesn't see us or doesn't hear us. It's willfully failing to yield to us.
So anytime we discuss policy, we've explained this in the past to the board, but we just want to reiterate it because it's very crucial whenever we're talking about policy that there's a good understanding of the terms, what they mean and how they apply to our policy. It really puts things into context as far as when a policy says we can or can't do something and how that is viewed in the eyes of the officer. And for the first term that we'll discuss is shall. You'll see shall across our policy manual. Anytime that is written, that is something that is not discretionary. If it says shall, it's telling us that's how we need to respond. If we're not responding, we could potentially be in violation automatically just because we're not doing something we're mandated to do. Should be looked at as if it were a shall. However, if I had a very good reason for taking a different course of action, if I could articulate it and it was a good cause, I could deviate depending on the circumstances. So should is like shall, unless I've got a very good reason which I can articulate as to why I had to deviate from such. And the last is may. If the policy says may, that is a discretionary thing, and it's solely stating an option that the officer has, and they can choose that option if they want to based on their discretion. So shall, should, or may. Any questions about that?
All right, diving into policy here a little bit, right out of our policy manual, when to initiate a pursuit. Officers are authorized to initiate and continue a pursuit after considering the following factors, and when it is reasonable to believe that a subject is attempting to evade arrest or detention by fleeing in a vehicle that has been given a signal to stop by a peace officer.
So with that said, obviously the policy allows us to pursue vehicles, but we should have several considerations or factors that we look at when we're determining whether or not we are going to initiate that pursuit. And the policy is very clear on that we need to consider each of those factors, not just individually or by itself, but collectively as a whole. And what you'll see as we start going through some of these factors is they almost overlap with each other. But as you look at all of them together as a whole, it really gives officers pretty good guidance, but it also at the same time lets you know they've got a lot running through their mind when this takes place. So not on top of the physiological things that the officer is dealing with when that person flees, where their heart rate increases and they immediately get a little bit of an adrenaline rush. Now they're also trying to consider all of these different factors and trying to determine what's the best course of action. So the first factor that they're going to consider is the seriousness of the known or reasonably suspected crime and its relationship to community safety. How serious is this crime? Is this a very low-level property crime? Or is this a higher-level personal crime that now if we don't take this person into custody without delay, that they're going to pose some danger to the public that we want to mitigate?
The next would be the importance of protecting the public and balancing the known or reasonably suspected offense with the apparent need for immediate capture against the risk to officers, innocent motorists, and others. So taking that suspected offense and balancing that with, do I need to capture this person now due to the risk of the officers, the innocent motorists, and anybody else?
Next is the apparent nature of the fleeing suspect, whether they represent a serious threat to public safety. An example of this is, maybe we can identify based on the driving behavior of this person that's fleeing that they're obviously impaired, whether it be drugs or alcohol, and due to that nature, they're automatically going to pose a much bigger threat to the public if we do initiate a pursuit than someone that is not impaired with anything. So definitely something that we would consider as well.
Then the identity of the suspect has been verified, and there is comparatively minimal risk in allowing the suspect to be apprehended at a later time. So this might be somebody that we are aware of. We know who committed the offense. Maybe we know where they live. And by allowing them to leave, we know that the risk to the community is minimal, and we can just apprehend them at a later time.
The safety of the public in the area of the pursuit, including type of area, time of day, amount of vehicular and pedestrian traffic, and the speed of the pursuit relative to these factors. So when we're talking about this, we're really considering things such as, is this happening right at time when school's getting out, right in a school zone, in a highly residential area? Or is this something where we're in the way western part of town, it's 3 a.m, it's the business district, there's no vehicles on the roadway? These are the kind of things that we're going to consider when we're initiating a pursuit. Obviously, the risk is going to elevate very quickly if we're in that residential neighborhood. If you're out in the county and you're posed with this, there might be nothing but fields around you as far as the eye can see. The risk there is you may go in the ditch, you may roll your vehicle. Here, if we were to operate at speeds that were unsafe or pursue and we shouldn't be pursuing based on the area, we could end up in someone's living room based on the way the roads are set up, the speeds that could be related, and we really need to take that and use caution as it relates to it. So this is a big factor for us.
The next would be the pursuing officer's familiarity with the area of the pursuit, the quality of the radio communication between that pursuing unit and the dispatcher or supervisor, and the driving capabilities of the pursuing officers under the conditions of the pursuit. So our policy states whenever we get into a pursuit, we need to relay the information of the pursuit to dispatch and our supervisor. So we're talking about the direction of the pursuit, the people that are in the vehicle, description of the vehicle, the speeds, other vehicular traffic, the environment, giving the dispatcher and supervisor the information of what's happening at the time. Now, if that officer is struggling with that, maybe due to stress, maybe there's just unfamiliarity with the area, maybe they work in normally they work in a different area of town and this is a new area for them and they're struggling giving out their location or the direction they're headed. Oftentimes we're just going to end that pursuit rather than get ourselves in a situation where an officer gets lost or doesn't know which direction they're going. And then also the driving capabilities of the pursuing officers. So talking about just their experience, is this the first time they've been involved in a pursuit? How many years of experience do they have? The conditions that they're operating in.
We'll also consider the weather, traffic, road conditions, and any unreasonable risk of danger that we're going to have weighed with our need to capture that suspect. So if this is going to happen in the middle of the winter and it's super icy, that may be something that's going to inhibit our ability to actually pursue that vehicle. So it's definitely something we're going to take into consideration. If roads are clear, traffic is light, we may be more likely to pursue if collectively with a lot of these other factors, it determines to be the best course of action.
Also the performance capabilities of the vehicles used in the pursuit in relation to the speed and other conditions of the pursuit. So taking into consideration the roadways, the conditions, the vehicle you're using, 4-wheel drive, 2-wheel drive, the vehicle you're chasing, the performance capabilities of that. Just some different things that we need to keep in mind.
A big one is vehicle speeds. And a lot of times, vehicle speeds will be one of the immediate factors. Our officers are trained to drive in emergency response type situations, so they do have training and experience driving quickly. However, the suspects that are fleeing from us lots of times don't necessarily have that training and that ability, and they also tend to outdrive their ability. Their speeds get way too quick, And for our officers, it's very important for them to continue. This isn't just a initial assessment, but it's a continual assessment throughout the course of a pursuit. You know, our speed's getting to a level where they're unsafe, especially for the areas we're in.
Then other persons in the inner or on the pursued vehicle, so passengers that are involved, whether they want to be there or not, potentially hostages, co-offenders. You know, if we're in a pursuit with a vehicle full of people, that we have to take that into consideration on whether or not that's something worth continuing, or allowing them to go and find them later.
Next is the availability of other resources such as aircraft assistance. There is times where we're receiving assistance from North Dakota Highway Patrol where they do have an aircraft available. In those cases, if we could follow a suspect with the airplane versus us pursuing them in the vehicle, obviously an excellent resource for us and something we'd definitely want to consider.
The police unit is carrying passengers other than on-duty police officers. Pursuit shall not be undertaken if a non-sworn department member or other person is or remains in the pursuit vehicle. So if we have somebody that's doing a ride-along with us, civilian, we're not going to get involved in any pursuits at that point.
Officers shall not initiate a vehicle pursuit solely for a traffic violation. So if that's the only reason we're stopping a vehicle and it flees from us, we're not going to be initiating it based on such a low-level offense unless we have more information available to us where it's hitting some of these other marks. It is a restrictive thing. However, it is a very beneficial thing for us because, like I said, us patrolling the city, the roadways, the residential areas, if we were pursuing for every traffic violation that immediately fled from us, it would be a danger to the public. So we want to make sure we're doing things as safe as we possibly could.
So how does an officer know when to discontinue? A big one would be the distance between the pursuing officers and the fleeing vehicle is so great that furthering that pursuit would be futile or would require the pursuit to continue for an unreasonable time or distance. So talking about that pursuit, the suspect car getting so far ahead that now you can no longer see what's going on up there. You're having trouble determining location, and in order to catch up to that person, you'd have to increase your speed drastically.
The next one would be the pursued vehicle's location is no longer definitely known. You come around the corner, you thought you were right on that vehicle's tail, come around the corner, it's gone, right? And for this, it's something that is challenging to train brand new officers because if you don't see the vehicle, you have a tendency to want to drive fast to find it. But that's really not the best course of action, right? Because if you don't know where you're driving fast to, you're not going to find it. And if anything, you're just causing unreasonable risk there as well. So for us, we make sure if the vehicle's location isn't known, you turn that corner. That's time where you slow down. You really become situationally aware of what's around you and see, because more often than not, they've ducked into a garage or they've hit an alleyway. And using that situational awareness is going to be a much better tactic than trying to continue a pursuit when you don't even know where the vehicle went.
If the officer's pursuit vehicle sustains damage or mechanical failure that renders it unsafe to drive, that would make it unsafe to continue that pursuit, so we would discontinue.
If the pursuit vehicle has an emergency equipment failure that causes the vehicle to no longer qualify for that Class A emergency vehicle, if for whatever reason the lights stop working, we're going to shut down because it's going to be unsafe for us to continue if we don't have those.
If at any time during the pursuit a person is injured as a result of the pursuit, the primary police unit shall be responsible for ensuring the injured person is provided with immediate medical assistance. This may include directing a secondary unit to stop and render such assistance. So, for example, the pursuit causes a crash, which causes an injury to somebody else that's not involved. We're going to make sure somebody stops and renders aid to that person immediately.
Another thing we're going to consider whether or not to discontinue is, are there hazards to uninvolved bystanders or motorists? Obviously, if that person is really driving in a reckless manner where we're creating that hazard and we're only perpetuating it by continuing that pursuit, we're going to strongly consider that discontinuation.
And something we talked about a little bit earlier, but when the identity of the offender is known and it does not reasonably appear that the need for immediate capture outweighs the risks associated with continuing the pursuit, they should strongly consider discontinuing the pursuit and apprehending the offender at a later time.
When directed to terminate the pursuit by a supervisor, again, that's not an optional thing. If they're directed by a supervisor to terminate, that's something that they're going to have to do. And the supervisor is going to constantly be monitoring that radio traffic. And one of those factors that we talked about earlier, are they getting the correct radio traffic out there? If they're not, the supervisor is going to be monitoring that, and they're going to shut down that pursuit in a timely manner. So now we'll get into, once that pursuit, we've decided to discontinue the pursuit. Once it's terminated, now what is our response?
All right, so all the vehicles involved shall come to an immediate stop, meaning they pull over and put the vehicle in park, stop the vehicle. The primary unit shall provide the last known location and the direction of travel for the suspect vehicle. And then with approval of a supervisor, the involved units may proceed in a non-emergent status and check the immediate area to ensure the suspect vehicle did not cause or become involved in a crash, meaning no lights on, no sirens, driving at a normal rate of speed, just to check the area to make sure that that suspect vehicle didn't immediately crash after we stopped the pursuit.
So now we'll get into the training aspect of it. So obviously you can see there's a lot involved with the policy. We do train on the policy piece of it with officers, but to really get them out there and give them some hands-on experience doing some emergency driving, it's really crucial in that skill building. So we provide them with training to familiarize them with the risk of emergency driving and then provide them with the information to mitigate that risk. So we end up doing a day of classroom, and then we do a day of actually out in the cars when we're in the police academy. So each class gets that opportunity to do that. We familiarize them with the emergency equipment within the vehicles, and then in a closed course controlled environment, we have them push those cars to the limits of their capabilities, and all the way to the point where they know where they're beyond the limits of the capabilities. But we do so in a controlled environment on a closed course, and it really gives them a much better idea. And I think for a lot of times it surprises them what those vehicles can do. And that training becomes extremely valuable for our new officers. We emphasize maintaining that proper mental conditioning associated with emergency vehicle operations. As I mentioned before, some of those physiological responses that we honestly can't help. When something happens and our heart rate elevates and our adrenaline kicks in, and all of a sudden we become so hyper focused that we get tunnel vision, and we're not hearing everything. We get auditory exclusion. We teach different things to help them through that. One thing we teach is controlled breathing, where methods of breathing in a manner that it helps calm you down. As they're driving, we teach them to scan each way, and that helps combat against that tunnel vision, and it helps them aware of what's going on around them. That in conjunction with the emergency vehicle operations we actually do in the car gives them a pretty good opportunity to experience some of this stress in that more controlled environment.
And how often is that training? Is it a single event, or is it a annual type of?
So they get their initial training in the police academy, and then we have ongoing training as well. And we either do that through the in the vehicles in that closed course setting, or we do it through the use of a driving simulator. And we'll explain that a little more in depth here as well.
Do you do it in different weather conditions and things like that, especially up in this region?
That's a good point. So we actually do in the academy. However, a lot of that is based on the time of the year in the academy, right? So we're somewhat limited based on that 13-week time frame where we hold the academy. But obviously, our winter academy, they generally end up operating the vehicle in a little different conditions. And then the summer academy obviously operates in summer conditions. However, emergency vehicle operations is much like a lot of the skills we have, where it's a constant practice, right? So the training then continues to occur throughout the police training officer program, which is another 16-week on-the-job program. So in that setting, they're going to actually have a trainer in the passenger seat right beside them, and they're going to be responding emergent to calls, potentially pursuing vehicles if a situation rises to that level, and they're going to get that continued scrutiny. And on top of that, anytime there is a pursuit that takes place, we do a formal evaluation where it's actually forwarded to our professional accountability unit. And each one of those situations is evaluated to determine if it was done in a safe manner, if they followed protocol, and if they didn't follow protocol, what opportunities can we take to train them better so they don't make those mistakes in the future.
So what you're watching now is a video of our emergency vehicle operations course. So this is actually done over at the Red River Valley Fairgrounds on their midway. We were able to use that, and we set up a course where the officers are getting used to the squad car, and as Lieutenant Hanig explained earlier, testing their abilities, both the squad car's abilities and the driver's abilities. So the track is broken up into several different components. We have a serpentine, which is basically weaving through cones, getting an idea of where that vehicle tracks. We have some tight corners where they get an idea of how that vehicle turns and how that vehicle tracks. We have a controlled braking exercise where they actually get up to a high speed and then use the brakes and get to feel what it's like for that analog brake system, the traction control, all that stuff to kick in and control the vehicle while that stuff is operating. Then we have an evasive maneuver where the officer is driving at a fast speed and they need to evade something that come out in front of them. Without hitting the brakes, they're just evading and getting used to making those split-second decisions. In addition, we have a couple backing exercises to help them understand how to back using mirrors, turning around, how to do it without a backup camera, which many struggle with nowadays. But just getting them used to that squad car. And then after we give them the practice and show them how to operate through this course at a safe speed and a reasonable speed, we challenge them. We try to get them to bring up the speed even faster and get them to a point where that vehicle is brought to the limit and they're brought to their limit, so they understand, okay, when I get out into the field, this is where my limit is. This is my threshold. And then they get to feel what that's like rather than just throwing them out there and having them exposed to that stuff in a real life environment. Some of the challenges we have when it comes to this course is having a facility large enough to do something like this, and that's where we rely on our partnership with the Red River Valley Fairgrounds to allow us to use that track, because there's not very many areas that are big enough in a controlled environment where we can do that. And in addition, you have the time of the year, right? Although it's good to get them the experience on snow and ice, limits what we can do in terms of the training. Things like driving at night, right? That's another thing that we have that's difficult to get that many officers through a training course like that. So taking all of those things into consideration, the adding of the vehicle driving simulator has really been able to help us accomplish those things, and that's really what we're going to talk about next, is how we've been able to use that to overcome some of these barriers we have with the environment, the amount of officers we have, and the amount of real estate it would take to train somebody on this. And then you consider pursuit training, right? Actually pursuing somebody down a city street is much different than pursuing somebody in an open parking lot, simulating roads, and that pursuit simulator allows us to do some of those things.
So the simulator, which we have at Fargo PD, is called the Doran simulator. This actually, when you sit in it, it is like you're sitting in a car. You've got a screen in front of you. You've got 2 screens on the side. It does take a little bit to get used to it. We did have an open invitation for any board members that were able to come in and have a chance to try out the simulator. We actually did have a few board members come in. Mr. Hoganson was one of them. And maybe he can provide some insight as to his experience on it. Do you have any thoughts or feelings about it?
Yeah, it was interesting. If you went over a rough road surface, it felt like you were in a vehicle on a rough road surface. The corners were really tight. It seemed to me that if you could master the simulator, you'd be really good behind the wheel of a real vehicle. So, it was fun.
Absolutely. It is a great tool for us, and it allows us to do a lot of the things, like Sergeant Berger said, as far as the multitasking and the situational awareness type things. As you go through that, you'll have different obstacles come out in front of you, and you'll have to use some of those maneuvers that we train in EVOC, but this allows us to do it in a safe environment where it really drives the point home. And I can tell you, you're definitely hyper vigilant driving a vehicle after you've spent a little bit of time in the simulator. For some people, it can be challenging because they can get motion sickness because it's like you're right in the middle of it, it feels like. And, you know, if you look to your side, the screens on the side are moving just like if you were to do that in your car. So the nice part about that simulator is it includes more than 120 different training scenarios. And each are focused on specific training directives or objectives that we're trying to get. So based on those techniques that we teach in EVOC and the things we teach in regards to our pursuit driving, it allows us to practice all those things, all the way down to calling out the pursuit while they're chasing the vehicle, they're calling it out on the radio, and we've got an instructor that actually manages that, and based on what's going on, they can manipulate that scenario during the course of it to change things, right? So it constantly challenges the officers. We can also create custom scenarios in that. So if we've got a specific block of instruction and we want to train a specific thing, we can build a scenario in there to make it fit our needs. So it has a motion to it, and between that and the screens, it feels like a real vehicle. Some agencies will actually set up their MDCs or their computers in there as well to really make it fit what the squad car is like. We haven't done that with ours yet, but it's been a great tool for us, and it's been something that's helped bridge the gap in regards to, you know, we don't have a large pursuit track that we can train on, but now this gives us an opportunity to train all those maneuvers in a safe environment, irregardless. Weather conditions, we can actually change the weather conditions in those scenarios as well. It can be daylight, it can be night, it can be sunny, raining, snowing, and based on what's happening with the weather that we set in those scenarios, it adjusts the coefficient of friction on the roadways, so your vehicle is going to match that. So if it's icy out and it's snowing, you're not going to be able to turn as sharp as you normally could, and the simulator basically gives you that experience. So that's all we have for you. Do you have any questions? I know that we hit a lot of points fairly quickly.
I have one question. Have you seen an increase here in Fargo with those type of incidents with fleeing vehicles and or injuries that occurred that you've gone over in this training today?
Sure. For us in Fargo, we haven't seen a lot of injuries, knock on wood, because our policy is fairly restrictive, but at the same time, we're really training our officers well on making those good decisions and truly evaluating what's taking place. And I think what we do see is we don't see a ton of fleeing vehicles. However, the ones we see are a lot of times officers that have tried to stop a vehicle and it fled from them, and they're obviously keep an eye out for that same vehicle, and they may have that, the next week later, they'll try and stop that same vehicle and it'll flee again. And it kind of supports the data that we see nationwide in that small percentage of the population are the ones that are fleeing from us. And I think that's right in line with what we're seeing in Fargo. We've got a very few amount of people that are fleeing, but the ones that are doing it are consistently the same ones. So then we have to think outside of the box. Can we figure out where that vehicle, where it originated from, where it's coming or going from? And then it helps us maybe catch them in a safer environment, catch them coming to or from their vehicle, and then investigate those incidents. And ultimately, one thing that we've looked at, Chief Sobolski has definitely made the charge in compiling some of that data. If you wanted more specifics, our professional accountability unit could provide more specifics on fleeing data, how many vehicles flee, and then how many pursuits we actually get into. However, the number of pursuits we're involved in is very low. But again, anytime those situations happen, they're vetted and evaluated by our professional accountability unit to make sure we're not missing the boat with any of our training and making sure that we're using the best practices that are out there to be as safe as we can.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I guess I was under the impression that there were significantly more fleeing vehicles now than in years past, but that's not necessarily so.
Again, we do have a good number of fleeing incidents, and like I said, a lot of those are repetitive, and that's why the chief has really kind of driven the charge to try and push for legislation that's maybe a little stiffer on those penalties. And that's obviously a work in progress. That's something we'd always like to see because it gives us another tool where we can help enforce that. But again, it's a smaller percentage of that population, and a lot of times when they are fleeing, it's for those minor traffic violations where officers are using good instincts and they're recognizing that a vehicle maybe looks suspicious and they commit a traffic violation and they try and stop it and it flees for one reason or another. And if we had a crystal ball, we could say, well, this is why they fled. But most of the time we don't figure that out until way later. But I can say our officers that are very aggressive in trying to identify who those people are, they're very successful in eventually identifying those people. So.
Another question, and we may have covered this a year ago when we were in our initial training, but when there's an emergency, like an ambulance or a fire engine, and they're coming to a light-controlled intersection, they have a device and they can keep the white light flash. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but do law enforcement have a similar tool they can use?
We do, yes. Yep, it's the exact same light function. Maybe Sergeant Berger can correct me, I'm wrong, but I think depending on, so if you had, say, a fire truck coming on one street and a police vehicle on the other street, and they're both trying to use the Opticom function to manipulate the lights, I think it would be whichever one grabbed that light first would be the one that it would stick with. So,
I have a question. First, thanks for the information.
absolutely.
Of all the information that you present, I had a scenario where I'll see if how this would be addressed, and if a car was to flee and go down the opposite direction of a one-way street, what would the officers do then? Even would they not pursue that because that is a dangerous situation, or would they also go down that one-way street, opposite direction though, to pursue that person?
Absolutely. That's something that would be very situational. So we don't have anything in our policy that would prohibit that. However, I agree, that's a dangerous situation to try and chase a vehicle the wrong way down a one-way. Definitely not an advisable thing to do. But could I say there's never going to be a circumstance where we would do that? Again, depending on all those other factors that we talked about, there could be an incident where it tips the scales and it makes it the right thing to do. But that's the very difficult thing, because when people ask us, or when a new recruit comes in and asks us, well, what crimes can we pursue for? And again, we can't give them a hard and fast, because our policy isn't written in that manner. And it doesn't say every time under this set of circumstances you can pursue a vehicle. Because if it did, if we had policy like that, our policy manual would be 10,000 pages long and nobody would be able to follow it. So instead, what we do is we give them factors to consider, and they have to make those split-second decisions, which are sometimes very challenging. And then after those, we really evaluate them and we determine, hey, is this something we can learn from as a department? Or is this a personal performance issue? Or maybe we evaluate it and they considered all the factors and they did exactly what needed to be done. So those are all things we would look at with that. But again, it's hard to give a hard and fast on anything like that.
Thanks.
Is there any other business?
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good.
No other business over here.
Okay. Okay, if there's no other business, I'm going to, this meeting of the Police Advisory and Oversight Board stands adjourned. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 9th at 5 p.m.